Hi, welcome to the show. This is your host, Laura Powers, and I'm so pleased today to have Michael Shu on the show. He is an intergenerational trauma healer and author. He's the author of two books, including You Are the Fucking Shit and Whose Movie Are You In, which is his most recent book. Thanks so much for being a guest on the show.
I'm excited
Thanks.
to be with the great psychic Laura Powers.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. And I read your book and I really liked everything you had to say. So the honor is mine as well. So I think you have a really interesting story. I like how personal you are in your writing and your focus. So let's just start about with your story, how you got into what you do, and then we can go into some of the details of the book.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it'd be good to share a recent example. I have a seventh and a half month old child, and with right before he was born, and he was born in the Czech Republic because that's where my wife has free access to healthcare.
Oh, wow.
And 10 days before he was born, and we were there for 2 months. For the whole time we were there, I had horrific insomnia. I'd sleep for 3 or 4 hours a day, and I'd wake up because I needed to change a diaper or I needed to go to the restroom. And immediately when I woke up, I feared that I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep.
That's a horrible
And
pattern. I've been in there myself.
yeah, and this kept on happening for 2 months, every day, every night. And I would wake up and not be able to go back to sleep. And it kept on happening. I was thinking about, well, if this keeps on happening, my worst fear is that I'll die. And I didn't know why. I was like trying to do every single method to find out why, and I didn't. But when I came home, my parents picked us up at the airport. We all had dinner together that very same night, and we're sharing stories. Me and my wife shared stories on how we raised our newborn, and my parents shared stories on how they raised me as a newborn. And I found out for the first time ever that my mother never took care of me throughout the night because
Mm,
she was scared if I were to wake her up, she wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. And she's extremely, obsessively fearful of death, but she avoids it all by fixating on health and safety. So, for example, I live in the addition of her house, and the house is it's in a nice neighborhood, but it's a fortress. There's an alarm system, a surveillance system. All the windows are barred up. Her bedroom door has a door lock, a chain lock, and she puts a chair against the door handle. So it's
wow. It's a
yeah,
lot of protections in
a lot
place
of
there.
protection. And I can keep going on and on. And so the amazing thing was that as a newborn, I felt and internalized her fear, pain, and trauma, and then repeated the same exact fear, pain, and trauma 39 years later when I had my own newborn. When I heard that story, it's just a huge relief, a release. Obviously, there's more to it, but that was my mother's movie that I was in. I didn't know why. And she
Yeah.
fears death because really it's rooted in this intergenerational phenomenon of abandonment. Like
Mm.
my grandmother, my great grandmother were all abandoned by my grandmother's father, who had remarried for a lady who was prettier and more educated because he's a high ranking general. So my grandmother's mother was severed from her first child, ended up living a life of severe poverty, getting she had a hunchback from working in the fields, and she never was able to see her child again. So that's the first experience of abandonment. Now my grandma's father, my great grandfather's second wife didn't want my grandmother to be a part of the family because she doesn't want to be known as a second wife or the stepmother. So my grandmother was raised by her grandparents. And so this is World War II, in a time of death, violence, and murder. And so with her, like, communists invaded my grandmother's home and then lined up her family members while she was hiding in the barn and killed them execution style. So she fled to safety to her father's new home. But his first reaction is disappointment because he knew that his second wife would be angry. So with
Mm.
her life on the line, she was not worth protecting. And she's 93 years old right now. And for all this time that I've known her during family lunches and dinners, she sits with her body facing outwardly because she feels subconsciously she's not a part of the family. And my
Oh.
mom internalizes as her own movie. But like when you internalize other people's pain as your own, like it doesn't make sense. So the mind, the thinking mind, the ego has to create a fear, which is the fear of death through like somebody invading our home to make sense out of it.
Yeah, I think this is really important because I have, as a psychic, gotten the message that most of whatever our fears, kind of worries, patterns are external, meaning they're not originating from our true self. So whether it's family patterns, like what you're talking about it, or whether there's, psychic phenomenon or even, past life things, there's so much happening. And the more we can separate ourselves from whatever that thought, feeling, or emotion is, the better we're able to handle it. Because when we really take it on as our own, then it feels so personal and it's really hard to heal it and to shift it. And as an empath, and a lot of my listeners are empaths, this is like huge. I remember reading the book A New Earth, and there's this idea of like, you are not your thoughts. And it was like this light bulb moment, like, wait, I'm not my thoughts. Like, this is so important because it gets so ingrained. So what tips have you found to help people with how do you
This
separate
is
that?
a side note. I'm sorry. The AC's unit is on. Do you want me? Do you
Oh,
hear
it's
it?
fine. It's fine. No, it's
Do
fine.
you hear it?
No, mm-mm.
Because I can close the window.
It's fine.
Okay, 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 got it.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So let me just start that again. So I think a lot of people really struggle with that ability to separate. Like, how do you stop yourself from going down that mental spiral, and really honor and recognize that you are not that thought pattern, whether it's from your family or past lives or society or whatever it is.
Got it, got it. So there's a process I've created. It's called the Emotional Strength FIST process to help you get to the root of all your negative emotions, feelings, and problems. And F stands for feeling, as in feeling is healing. Because normally we are thinking, overthinking, or constant do. Thoughts and actions are important, but they're the ship that helps us get to our destination. Our captain is feeling, and feeling sets the foundation for all other levels of healing and awareness to be possible. But the thing is, we don't want to feel because we associate with feeling as in feeling pain. And so that pain is an emotional wound. We got to feel it to identify it, what I call cutting the head off the snake. But I kind of went ahead. There's a mantra to help people center themselves first. Out of all of this, you tell yourself, problems bring up feelings in us that existed before the problem ever happened.
Oh, I think that's really important because we tend to think of, okay, whatever is the trigger, that's the problem.
Got it, got it.
That
Yes.
person is making me feel bad, or the situation where I don't have enough money makes me feel insecure, whatever that is. But I really like what you said. It's really, that's already there. The problem is just kind of bringing it to the surface.
Yeah. And that's the thinking mind, the one that's constantly thinking, overthinking. And it tells us if you fix the problem, you will fix the feeling. But the feeling preceded the problem. So even if you
Yeah.
fix the problem, the core issue, the core negative feeling still exists. Now that feeling is a weed, not the weed that we smoke, but the weed
Different
that the weed that grows in the ground. Okay.
kind.
It's
Yeah.
going to say something negative about you, but it's not true about who you really are. You just need to uncover it, identify it, pull it out so it doesn't overtake your yard and control how you feel and think on a subconscious level.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I actually use that analogy of, the sort of garden and weeds itself. And I feel like, most people, it's basically like you inherit a patch of land and it's like whatever's there is there. And it's usually full of weeds and not whatever you want. You have to weed and you have to plant the rose bushes or the orchard or, fruits and vegetables or whatever it is that you want. And most people are not realizing how much effort it takes to sort of cultivate our inner garden for it
Yes.
to be what we want. But the good news is the when you learn these tools and things like what you're talking about, you have to do a lot of weeding, quote unquote weeding in the beginning, but then it just becomes a lot easier. Like I find now that I have some of these tools, my sort of mindset, my mental patterns are so much better. I still have to catch myself sometimes, but it's not like it was before where I just remember it was in the beginning. It was like, oh, this is so much work to get this happening. So since the trigger isn't really the issue, whatever it is that is the sort of instigating issue to make us feel what we think is feel a certain way, you know, how do we catch ourselves from going down that kind of mental spiral?
Then we move on to the I and the FIST process, which is
Okay.
identify these weeds and these core negative feelings. This is called cutting the head off the snake. I'll get to that in a little bit. But the process to identify these weeds and these core negative feelings is the PEWF proof process. And so P stands for problem, E stands for emotion, because you want to understand the problem on an emotional level. Because if you think about it on a mental level, it's never ending. You never get to the real core of it.
Right.
So um, for me, like the insomnia brought me a lot of anxiety. Okay. And so you want to identify the feeling. To do that, next step is to go to the W, which is worst fear, worst case scenario. So you take the original problem, stretch it all the way to your worst fear, worst case scenario, and then you see what does it look like. And so for me, that worst fear was, okay, it was death. It doesn't matter if it's not logical, it's really coming from that place of that emotion. I almost forgot the emotion. Sometimes we don't really know how to identify it because it's typically anxiety, anger, and depression, but there's subcategories to it. When we suppress anxiety, we feel it as worry and fear. When we
Yeah, I think that's really, really important to address because there's a lot of people think I don't have anxiety, but they're a constant worrier. Like they
yeah
worry all the time. I see
yeah
this a lot with my clients, and it makes sense. It's a way for your body to sort of process the worry because it feels like you're doing something about it by thinking about it
hmm
obsessively.
yeah yeah and the anger, the suppression of that is frustration.
Mm.
And the word depression, there's a stigma to it, and I believe a misconception. To me, it's really emotional suppression, suppressing, numbing, and bottling in how you feel. When they identify with that, I immediately go to the worry, fear, and frustration. Those are all acts of suppressing our emotions.
I think that's really powerful. In fact, I'm just going to take a note: worry, fear, and depression. Or
Worry, fear,
worry,
frustration,
okay,
and then
frustration.
depression, otherwise known as emotional suppression.
Okay. Yeah, I think that emotional depression piece is huge because it's like we're in a culture where everyone is just kind of taught to keep everything bottled up or it's like it's not acceptable to have our emotions, and then inevitably you will get depressed. These emotions, if we handle them properly, actually help us, process through things and move forward. So let's just talk about let's pick depression. If you're in that pattern where you struggle with depression, how can you learn to process through it?
The depression is just emotional suppression.
Yeah.
And so I just want to see, do they suppress how they feel? Then I immediately go into someone who suppresses how they feel typically experiences worry, fear, or frustration. Because these are all mental ways that we process the emotion. Anxiety is more of a connecting with that emotion. Worry, fear, it's all in the mind. So emotional suppression, depression, when people are in that category, they think a lot. They think, do, because that's how we suppress in many ways. Constant thinking, constant action.
So if you are suppressing, how do you allow yourself in and I guess a responsible manner to allow yourself to express and connect with that emotion? It's so funny. I had an experience the other day where I just was at the shipping store, and like I got so angry, and it was like ridiculous because I was like, this is like not warranting the level of anger. Now granted, as we're recording this, we're still in the lockdown situation with coronavirus, and so only shipping and grocery stores or whatever, it's an unusual time for sure, and I think everyone's kind of on edge, but I still was like, wow, okay, clearly there's something I need to process here, and I need to do it in a better way than with the employee at the at the store.
So to process to move away from emotional suppression? Is that your question?
Yeah, but clearly it's something that needs to be expressed or that's asking to be addressed. Like, how do we get at that? But again, in a responsible way where we're not like going into a rage
Yeah, yeah.
or just sinking into like a depression where we don't do anything.
For yeah,
How do we process through it in a way that is helpful for us and others?
I think first step is tell yourself feeling is healing. And what I have people like, how we were saying like we're weeding our gardens or we're trying to
Hmm.
cultivate our gardens. I feel like there's all these weeds. There's the big elephant in the room or on the garden, and we're so busy working in our little corner, cultivating and gardening, and that portion gets bigger and bigger because it's an emotional wound. When you have any wound that we avoid, it only grows and consumes us.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, completely. You can't. Yeah, you can't ignore something and expect it to go away.
yeah, yeah. And I have people. It's a first step. Close their eyes and then find where they feel the anxiety, worry, fear, anger, frustration, or whatever that tension is, either in their throat, their heart, the top or the bottom of their stomach. And I just have them feel it and just telling them feeling is healing because they normally want to figure it out. I said, don't figure it out. Just feel it, telling yourself feeling is healing. And that establishes the foundation. And the proof process, PEWF, is the mechanism of the ego. And this is called cutting the head off the snake because the thinking mind, the ego, tells us that because that proof process is the mechanism of the ego. It tells us, the ego will tell us, fixate on the problem, which is the P. Emotion, fixate on the emotion, anxiety, anger, depression. W, fixate on the worst fear and the worst case scenario in order to prevent it. All of which is designed to help you avoid feeling the F, which is feeling about the self. Because we don't want to feel it. It says something negative about us, but we only avoid something that we believe is true, that is real. So if we avoid these feelings and they're saying that we're failure, that we're powerless, that we're worthless, that we're alone, that we don't matter, if we avoid the feeling, if we avoid feeling it, then we are saying that it's true. So we have to feel the feeling, face it, cut the head off the snake so we know, because when we face it, then we can begin to see that it begins to lose its power over us. Where does it come
Yeah.
from? We'll know, find out the next step. But at least facing it is much better than avoiding it.
Yeah, one of the things I think you talked about this in your book, but I've certainly found this to be helpful is to go down that path of like, what am I afraid of? Like, what does that mean? What's the worst case scenario? And you kind of go down that mental track. And, for me, a lot of these things kind of came true during the recession because I might lost my marriage, my house, my career, my money. I was physically sick. Like everything that I feared,
Are
like
you
kind of
talking about
happened.
2008?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and it was like everything fell apart. Like literally, like there wasn't an area of my life that didn't fall apart. And it felt horrible in a way, but actually I feel so strong now because like all those things that I thought would destroy me didn't. Like it actually made me stronger. And so now I'm like, I have, comparatively compared to then, I have very little fear because I'm like, oh yeah, whatever is that, like, oh my God, you know, I will lose everything or whatever that fear is.
Hmm.
Um, it's like it's clear. Now I still have some stuff we all do that we're working on, but I think when we kind of address that and think like, what am I going to be okay? Oh yeah, I am okay, even if that is true or whatever.
Yeah. Well, also, you want to think, well, if your worst fear did come true, just hypothetically speaking,
Yeah,
or if it did come true, what do you fear to really get to the worst fear? What would you fear that would happen because of it?
right.
And you think about if my worst fear came true, that's the F in the proof process, PWF. F is feeling about the self. You want to think about if your worst fear came true, how would it make you feel about who you are? There are three common feelings that come up. I call them FWP. F stands for failure or failing others. W stands for, and there's many subcategories of this one, worthlessness, which is I don't matter. I'm alone. People don't care about me. I'm abandoned. Even the fear of death, because if you die, you cease to exist, which is the most extreme version of worthlessness, or I'm disrespected, or some. Um, and the last one, P, and it comes in two different forms, is powerless. powerless as a fixer because we feel immensely responsible for others. That's when we use our personal key to drive the vehicle of life for another. But then we're trying to
Yeah.
be in control of something that is out of control, which makes us feel powerless.
I think that's a huge issue for empaths. And I'm just mentioning that because I think a lot of my listeners are empaths where we are trying to fix something that's not ours to fix. And then of course, yeah, you feel powerless because you're you can't fix someone else or someone else's issue. That's their
Yeah,
issue.
yeah.
That's why it's there. And from an energetic perspective, uh, you know, a lot of times what happens is in your third chakra, the solar plexus chakra, which is your sense of power, you have other people's energy. So it's interesting that you said, where do you feel it in your body? Because I feel like that's telling you where a lot of times the foreign energy is in the body. So if you feel it in your stomach, you probably have other people's energy in your
Hmm.
stomach. So whether that's a partner or a family member or whatever, and if you focus on healing and clearing that, and thereby releasing that person's problem and not making it your own, then that is huge. That was something I really had to learn how to do. I was so used to focusing on other people. It's like I didn't even know how to focus on myself. But going down this path where everything was destroyed really focused me to do that, because it was like, well, that working on other people clearly didn't work very well. I need to redirect. Would you say that's a fairly common issue for people where they're really, instead of trying to fix their own pattern, they're trying to fix other people?
I mean, that's my own pattern. My wife's been telling me that. Um, that's, but the more dangerous one is when it's completely subconscious that you have
Yeah,
no
which I
idea
think
that you're doing.
I think it is for most people. I really think that I mean, when I went down this path myself, like I wasn't aware, like, oh, I married this person, or I'm in a relationship with this person because I'm trying to heal or fix them. Like it wasn't a conscious awareness, but now I understand that that was a deeper unconscious
Yeah, yeah,
patterning that I was
yeah,
doing nevertheless.
yeah. But it could also be not even related to the person. The person maybe just be triggering something. So, for
Sure.
example, the last feeling, powerless, is just to need the need to be in control. If we're not in control, then we may freak out or may get angry, and that moves into the S part of the FISD process, which is separation, separating from what doesn't belong to you. And to understand what separation is, I ask people, if somebody around them is feeling anxious, angry, sad, or depressed, are they able to feel it, sense it, or pick up on it? And if they say yes, that puts them in the category of the 1 out of 5 of high sensitivity and high empathy.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just think that's where a lot of, especially women, are in that place where they are doing that even unconsciously. Like when I started this work, I was so wrapped up in other people's energy and their emotions, I couldn't even figure out sometimes what I was feeling. And I was also born into an unhealthy situation with my biological father, and so I think when there's abuse and trauma, I think that's very common for people to, like, they're so used to trying to kind of make sure they're not triggering a situation that they're really focused on others and the others' emotional state to try to protect themselves.
Yeah. Oh, you mean
Like
helping
walking on
others
eggshells.
to avoid their own?
Yeah, like, oh, if I do something and that'll trigger this person, I'm going to always be monitoring them and trying to make sure they're in a good place so I don't trigger them so that it doesn't hurt me.
Okay, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if that becomes so automatic, you don't even realize you're doing it. Like you don't realize I'm putting all my attention on that other person to protect myself.
Kind of like you're walking on eggshells.
Yeah, but you don't realize you're doing it. It's just how
Yeah.
you sort of automatically operate, and that, so to the point that you don't even kind of know how to look at your own emotions or what's going on with you because you're so trained to
Well,
focus.
my wife has a lot of, like, she's working through a lot, but she'll have a lot of emotional explosions.
Hmm.
One time, because when the coronavirus started really peaking, she would watch and be consumed by the news, and it would just overtake her. And I was just like frustrated about it, and so I just turned off the internet, and she didn't know how to turn it back on. And I locked myself in the office, and she was banging on the door, banging. I ignored her, and I finally opened it up, and she was holding our baby, and she was punching me and then kicking me and yelling at me, and that like there's so many explosions, and it's just like it's been so unnerving. But one thing that really helped was me setting consequences to her actions.
Yes.
That
Yeah,
was the
absolutely.
big thing that changed. But that was, yeah, I I'm so in tune with how other people are feeling. It's And I forget. I just need to focus on my dream, myself, and that's how I'm going to help others the most powerful way.
Yeah, and also that, even if we have labeled something that someone else is doing as bad or not helpful, we can't shift them. We need to just focus on our response to that situation or shifting the situation so we're not being exposed to that. So it's a big challenge. I mean, especially when you're living with someone. And I do think this is a very unique time with coronavirus. It's everyone's stress level is like to the max.
Just bring up all of our worst fears, unresolved stuff
Yeah, and
to the
psychically, I have
max.
I have been shown that one of the things coronavirus is doing on a spiritual level is helping people to face their fear and clear it, because it's like, that walk through the fire, the catharsis, like you clear it while you go through it. And so that's, like I said, for me, it happened a lot during the recession where I was faced so many of these really intense, deep-seated fears. And so now I'm not going to say I'm fearless, but compared to then I am because I've literally I lost everything, and I'm fine, from it. In fact, I'm stronger from it. And so if we can look at our fear and not get so pulled into um, what we think that means for us, but rather just be in the moment, then I think that's helped me to just like not get trapped into this negative spiral of it, but just pause and be in the moment and
Yeah,
do whatever I need in the moment to stay fine.
yeah. I like I have somebody that I featured in the second book. Whose movie are you in? And like her name is Monica, and she has tremendous social anxiety, like crippling social anxiety. She's frustrated with her husband, who has severe addiction to hoarding. He has like 6 to 7 storage units. He pays for
Oh my
them. He
goodness.
doesn't pay for their house payments.
Wow. Oh my
But
goodness.
the social anxiety is like, what if I have nothing? Her words phrase, like, I don't have nothing to say back, and they judge me. They think I'm like some uh loser, or just, I don't know. And to be judged and abandoned, like her image would be tarnished. And then with the husband, the biggest pain for her was she feels responsible for him, but there's nothing she can do to help him. And though so the root of all of this is like, number one, the responsibility was her father actually also feels really responsible for his children, and because they didn't turn out the way he wanted to, he feel like he's failed as a parent, and he's a full-blown alcoholic. But his own father, Monica's grandfather, also was a full-blown alcoholic. And why did he drink? Because he came back from World War II broken, because he saw the death of his colleagues, and he had to kill natives in their native land, because it was a kill or be killed situation. So I almost forgot. The second session I had with her, she tells me, I want to go into, I've already done 7 years of nursing studies, and I cannot pull the trigger. I don't know why I cannot follow this career. I don't know if I really want to. And she asked, like, what's your worst fear? Well, I might kill a patient because I made a miscalculation. It's just obsessing with her. And that's why she doesn't follow through. But the
Hmm.
reason why, what if I kill somebody? What if I kill a patient? It's rooted in that grandfather, in that kill or be killed situation. He had to kill in people that he didn't want to, but he was just forced to in that situation. And so she's reliving in that. Then we go down, like, okay, we clear all of that. Okay, so what about nursing? And she's like, I still feel like split. I don't understand why. I can't really go after it. It's like, well, what are you worried about? It's like, well, if I don't complete it, then my family members will judge me. They're very judgmental. My mom is so critical about everything that I do and how I raise my parents. I mean, how she raises her kids. And it's so much about image. Like, even it passes down into Monaco, where to the point where they're grocery shopping. She has 5 kids, if they're like being fussy or crying, she actually will leave them in the grocery store because she's afraid from being embarrassed. So it's about like, oh, my family members will judge me. Oh, other people in the grocery market will judge me. And where does that judgment come from? From the Great Depression.
Hmm. Well, I think
Because
there's a lot of stuff from the Great Depression
yeah,
and World War II popping up now,
yeah,
in terms of themes coming up for us to resolve and
yeah,
clear.
yeah. And so the grandmother, all she cared about on the mother's side, right? This is from the social. Why? Where's her social anxiety coming from? Her mother's critical, but critical about really about image, and the grandmother was obsessive about image and reputation because that was the times when you lost everything, lost all your money, all you had left was your image. And so, and women did not have any rights. So
Yeah.
they had to marry. There's like it was a success if you married the 50-year-old butcher. And then if your husband were to die, you lost all your money. So you had to remarry after that. So that's why there was this complete obsession and fixation on image, on reputation. That it meant the world. And so it's helpful because it kind of tied in what we're experiencing right now, along with the coronavirus. This gonna be like Rich Dad Poor Dad. Robert Kiyosaki said this is gonna be the worst recession in global history. And so it's, to me, I thought it's just bringing up this similar. Her example brought up a very similar feeling that was something we can relate to about what's happening right now.
Yeah, I think this is really important because so much of what conflict is about is not really what it is about. And actually, when I was reading your first book, one of the things that really became clear to me is how much of my conflict with my own mother, for example, really is about things that she perceives would look badly on her as a mother. So something that I'm doing that she thinks, it's not even about what I'm doing. It's like she thinks that'll make her look bad as a mom because it's not, whatever she thinks is the best thing or whatever. And so it was just fascinating because I'm like, oh my gosh. And I need to just release that. And I think, we've done a lot of work in general, but it's fascinating how deep this is. And yeah, my mom was, she's a baby boomer, and her parents, were around during the Great Depression. And there's a lot of these things that I think are really cycling through from, like I said, from the Depression and from World War II. So it's fascinating to see it. And then there's deeper spiritual elements to this. Like a lot of us had past lives in that time. And so it's like we're processing not just whatever are the family things, but also even our own unconscious memories from those past lives and that trauma. So, for example, a lot of people that are really in a lot of fear right now about coronavirus and dying, they maybe have lived through other plagues or pandemics, or maybe they didn't live through it. And so it's like having a traumatic memory that you can't quite access, and it just brings so much fear
Yeah,
for
yeah.
you.
I somebody I coached also for the book. Her name is Scotty, and she is very fearful that her husband will die. He has sleep apnea and COPD. So with the coronavirus, she's like, oh, he's high risk. She'll wake him up in the middle of the night, very, very frequently, to see if he's still alive.
Oh my
Her worst, her can you
gosh.
imagine? I just,
That's
for
hard to get a
me,
good
like I have
night's
this
sleep
fear
at
of
that
like not
point.
sleeping well. I was like, are you still alive? She'll check to see if he's still breathing, you know.
Wow.
But where's that coming from? Because her mother, this is a long story, but her mother, it relates. But her mother committed suicide a year ago. She attempted 14 times to commit suicide. The reason why, part of it is she was verbally, physically, and sexually abused by her stepfather, and her mother, Scotty's grandmother, did not protect her. Said, keep it quiet, because she was married multiple times. Like, don't ruin this for me. I don't want to be
Yeah.
alone. And why did she feel alone? Why did Scotty's grandmother feel alone? Because Scotty's grandmother's father passed of Lou Gehrig's disease when she was 8. So that fear of somebody dying and then becoming almost like an orphan. Her biological father was the same thing, which she barely ever met in her life. Her biological father, his mother passed when he was very, very young. And then the father, for some reason, did not step up to the plate, and him and his her biological father and his twin went into an orphanage. So it's like if you die, you become abandoned, you become an orphan. And so with the coronavirus, it's like, oh no, oh no, she's a waitress in Kansas, so she's fearful of catching. It's like, well, if I die, I cease to exist. It's like this death, and if you die, you become abandoned. If somebody dies, you become abandoned. So it's just like it's triggering that thing for her.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so much of this ultimately is, that we are unconsciously holding on to the pain from others, the patterns from our parents, family members, from our past lives. And I feel like accessing this is really the key. And then recognizing, because I think sometimes once you even recognize where it's coming from, for me at least, it's helped me to release it. Like
For
I still
sure.
have to catch myself, but it's like, oh, that's why I feel that way. And then it's just like this, like sudden, like, oh, shift, and everything just shifts. Well, this has been so fun. I would love to hear if there's, anything else you'd like to share, any other words of wisdom or anything we can share with our listeners today.
I mean, it's hard to say in a little bite size, but I don't know, maybe if you want, you can do another interview, but it's really focusing on creating and being the director of your own movie. That one is so important. So don't think like, oh, I just need to heal this pain and then everything will be rosy after that. Not necessarily, because when you follow your dreams, it's really gonna bring up even more crap. It's gonna
So
bring
true.
up the biggest pain. The most hidden pain is gonna come up when you follow your dream. But that pain, when you overcome it, it's gonna be the beacon of light that you're gonna shine onto the world. Your experience of it and your healing of it and your transformation through it is gonna be critical. So you going through all this stuff, as painful as it is critical for your reason for existence, because that's your message. That's the movie that you're meant to share with the world.
I completely agree with you. And I think we're constantly working on it. I mean, we're works in progress, but I agree the messaging, from our families, from society, kind of the world as a whole to keep us from our greatest, sort of glory is so strong. But then once you work through it, it's so rewarding. And I'm still working on it at varying levels as well, but it is so powerful. And so thank you very much for doing this work and helping people access that. If people want to learn more or connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
They can go to my website, Heal, from the groundup.com, which is about going to the root of it all, or check out my book, You Are the Fucking Shit, or Whose Movie Are You In? And I do have a YouTube channel and a podcast. Both are named Heal from the Ground Up, or they can email me at michael@healfromthegroundup.com.
Okay, amazing. Well, it's so great to connect with you, Michael. Thanks for talking with us on the show.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. If you'd like more information about me, you can go to my website, healingpowers.net. You can find me at Twitter at Laura Powers, Instagram at Laura Powers 44, and on Facebook at Healing Powers. Take care.